Welcome to Skytech-Lens. The world's longest undefended border has become a tense, fortified line. Where cars and trucks once flowed freely between the U.S. and Canada, now miles-long queues and heavy inspections are the new normal. At the Ambassador Bridge, engines idle for hours and anxiety hangs in the air. Canada has responded to U.S. pressure with a $1.3 billion security surge. X-ray scanners, radar towers, and drones now monitor every crossing. 10,000 new border agents have been hired, trained to use advanced chemical analyzers and enforce strict inspections. The result: illegal crossings have plummeted by 90%, but legitimate trade is suffering. For border communities, the change is jarring. Families and businesses that once crossed daily now face suspicion and delay. The border, once a formality, is now a real barrier, physical and psychological. The economic partnership, worth nearly $2 billion a day, is under threat from political decisions far from the border itself. The era of easy passage is over, replaced by a climate of suspicion and lost opportunity. The cost is measured not just in dollars but in lost time, strained relationships, and rising tension. The border's transformation is a daily reminder of how quickly trust can be replaced by fear. The world's longest friendly border is now a front line in a new kind of conflict. The trade war erupted overnight. On July 31, 2025, President Trump declared a national emergency and hiked tariffs on Canadian goods to 35%. The justification? National security. The White House accused Canada of failing to stop fentanyl from crossing the border. This move bypassed all diplomatic channels, catching Ottawa off guard. The U.S. cited a surge in opioid deaths and claimed most northern border apprehensions involved people with criminal records. By linking tariffs to the fentanyl crisis, Trump framed the move as protecting American lives, a message that resonated with many voters. Canada's government, led by Mark Carney, scrambled to respond. Ottawa dropped its own counter-tariffs and scrapped a planned digital services tax targeting U.S. tech giants. But these concessions did little to ease tensions. Instead, Canada poured resources into border security, hoping to address U.S. concerns. The tariffs stayed and the relationship shifted from friendly to transactional. Trade became a weapon, security a bargaining chip. The era of handshake diplomacy was over. Now, every crossing, every shipment was a test of loyalty and leverage. The U.S.-Canada partnership, once built on trust, now felt like a high-stakes negotiation. Ottawa's efforts to appease Washington only deepened the sense of vulnerability. The new dynamic: prove your worth or pay the price. The border had become a symbol of suspicion, not cooperation. The trade war was just beginning. The 35% tariff hit Canadian industry like a sledgehammer. Steel shipments to the U.S. dropped 28% in just 3 weeks, threatening tens of thousands of jobs. Auto plants in Ontario faced chaos as just-in-time supply chains broke down. Delays of days could halt production in both countries. Logistics companies bled money as border waits drove up costs by 18%. Every day of slowed traffic costs the North American economy $60 million. U.S. and Canadian business groups warned that annual shipping costs could rise by $3 billion. The tariffs are a tax on the entire ecosystem, making Canadian goods pricier and snarling supply chains. Manufacturers now face crippling uncertainty, forced to reconsider investments and hiring. The trade war has turned a reliable partnership into a climate of risk and retreat. Behind the numbers, Canadian families are paying the price. In Ontario and Quebec, farmers watched U.S. orders vanish. Dairy exports fell 40% in August, pork by 25%. For many, this means spoiled goods, canceled contracts, and the threat of bankruptcy for family farms. Statistics Canada warns farm losses could top $2.5 billion if tariffs persist through harvest. The pain spreads to factories. A Brookings study projects up to 80,000 Canadian jobs lost if the standoff drags on. For workers, layoffs mean anxiety about mortgages, groceries, and their children's future. The emotional toll is immense. Many Canadians feel betrayed by a neighbor they once trusted. "We've done everything right," says one dairy farmer. "Now, because of politics, my family's future is at risk." This sense of injustice is hardening attitudes and eroding goodwill. The trade war isn't just an economic crisis, it's a crisis of trust and identity. Rural communities already struggling now face a silent epidemic of stress and uncertainty. The cost is measured in lost livelihoods and broken bonds. The damage may last for generations. As the U.S. trade war raged, Canadian farmers faced a second blow. China slapped a 75% tariff on canola seed. China, Canada's top canola buyer, shut its doors in retaliation for Canada's tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. Canola futures plunged and the industry, worth $29 billion and 250,000 jobs, was rocked. With 90% of canola destined for export, losing China was an existential threat. Farmers already invested in seed and fertilizer now faced a harvest with nowhere to sell. Farm incomes are projected to fall 22% in 2025, with $500 million in extra storage costs for unsold grain. The only option dumped canola into the U.S. at fire sale prices, crushing Canadian margins. Canadian farmers are caught in a pincer, U.S. tariffs on one side, Chinese retaliation on the other. The Prairies are ground zero for a global trade war. The pain isn't just north of the border. U.S. auto plants in Michigan and Ohio are short on Canadian parts. One late truck can idle an entire line. Grocery stores in upstate New York face empty shelves as produce from Ontario is delayed or spoiled. Food prices rise and retailers scramble for distant suppliers. Tourism and real estate are hit too. Canadian visits to the U.S. drop 23%, and snowbird destinations see bookings plummet. The Brookings Institution warns the U.S. could lose up to 120,000 jobs if tariffs persist. The IMF says North American GDP growth could fall by 0.5% in 2025. The tariffs are a tax on prosperity, hurting workers and consumers on both sides. In a deeply connected economy, no one is immune. The trade war is a lose-lose proposition. The trade war has ignited a political storm in Canada. Opposition leader Pierre Poilievre accuses Prime Minister Carney of being unprepared and weak. Polls show 62% of Canadians think the government is mishandling the U.S. relationship. The biggest rift is in Alberta, where Trump's tariffs exempted oil and gas, fueling Western alienation and separatist talk. Premier Danielle Smith seizes the moment, vowing to defend Alberta's interests if Ottawa won't. The crisis is now internal as well as external. Canada's unity is at risk. The federal government faces pressure on two fronts, Washington and its own provinces. The stakes for national unity have never been higher. At kitchen tables and coffee shops, fear and frustration are everywhere. In Canada, many feel unfairly targeted by a neighbor they once trusted. "We're not enemies," says a laid-off auto worker, "but this feels like a punch from a friend." Farmers in Saskatchewan despair as unsold grain piles up. "I'm talking about my daughter's future, not geopolitics." In the U.S., support for Trump's hardline stance is strong, especially among those who believe Canada hasn't pulled its weight on security. But in border states, the pain is real. A Buffalo shop owner says, "My business is down 30%, making it harder for Canadians to visit just hurts us." Truckers and small businesses on both sides are exhausted by delays and lost income. "This is just politics," says one American driver. "It doesn't make us safer, we're all losing here." The divide between political rhetoric and daily reality is growing. National pride is hardening, but so is resentment. The trade war is changing how neighbors see each other. The cost isn't just economic, it's personal. Trust is eroding, and the damage may outlast the tariffs. The border is now a line of division, not connection. The human toll is impossible to ignore. As autumn 2025 unfolds, the North American economy teeters on the edge. If the standoff drags on, job losses could spiral. 80,000 in Canada, 120,000 in the U.S., with more to come. Factory closures and layoffs could trigger a vicious cycle of reduced spending and more business failures. The integrated supply chains that made North America competitive may unravel, driving up prices and eroding industrial capacity. The political and social fabric is fraying. Regional tensions in Canada, economic pain in U.S. swing states, and rising nationalism on both sides. The goodwill that once defined the relationship is fading fast. The U.S. Federal Reserve has already cut rates, signaling growing economic risk. Without a breakthrough, the partnership that brought prosperity to millions could be dismantled, piece by piece. It's far easier to break trust than to rebuild it. The livelihoods of ordinary people hang in the balance. Thanks for watching. Subscribe the channel for more updates.